So I am really grateful to get to be with you all today. You all have some amazing elders. I was grateful to get to be with them this weekend and to learn about what an amazing congregation you are. So I am the Reverend Sandhya Rani Jha. I work in Oakland, California. I was the pastor of First Christian Church of Oakland for a number of years and helped a very tiny congregation transform their very big building into what is now a hub for 40 different nonprofits who are working to create peace. It was a congregation who had all lost people to violence in the streets of Oakland and wanted to contribute to creating peace there. And so the Oakland Peace Center is their legacy. I'm really inspired by the generosity and the courage of that congregation. So I like to let people know about them wherever I go. I am trying a little experiment this morning. I, on Thursday evening, was supposed to give a presentation to the students at the Leadership Institute at Allen Temple, which is the biggest and most vibrant African American church in Oakland. And the Leadership Institute prepares people to go into ministry and social change work who might not be able to go to seminary, but who get trained up in really powerful gifts and then get to do ministry all over the Bay Area. I was supposed to speak to them on Thursday night about community and justice. And because of a scheduling glitch, wasn't able to before I came out here. I was thinking about the fact that, and I should mention, I'm South Asian. South Asian identity is formed of people who are American, but from India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, the Maldives, all of those communities. My father's from India, my mother's from Scotland. And I found myself thinking about the fact that people of color often have different conversations with each other than we do when we're talking to white people. And part of that is because we want to protect our white brothers and sisters. Some of it is we're afraid of making them angry and getting punished. But the conversations we have among people of color are sometimes different than the conversations we have with white people. So I decided to ditch the sermon that I was going to preach to you and let you eavesdrop on the conversation I was going to have with my black brothers and sisters from Allen Temple. And that's where this message comes from. So you get to eavesdrop for the morning. The last thing I want to mention is, I know you all as a congregation are as casual as I am, and I did not need to wear a stole today. But I wanted to wear this one because it was a gift from my friend V. Nguyen. He's the head of Week of Compassion, and he gave this to me when I got ordained. He missed my ordination because he was in Croatia with a program that the Disciples of Christ through Week of Compassion continues to support that brings Muslim and Christian women together to create things like liturgical resources. And this was made by a Muslim woman who had survived the civil war there and was now making a life for herself and her family. And so I wear it as a reminder that no matter how horrific the violence, no matter how awful the governments that are trying to tear people apart and pit them against each other, the power of reconciliation is a real thing, and that's the hope that I carry with me this morning. So will you be in an attitude of prayer with me? Up above my head, I hear music in the air. Up above my head, I hear music in the air. Up above my head, I hear music in the air. I really do believe, there's a heaven somewhere. Amen. On the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Black Panther Party here in Oakland, I remember a story that is probably familiar to you about Stokely Carmichael, one of the founders of the Black Panther Party. He said, "Growing up, I used to hear people talk about justice. And I didn't know what they were talking about until I was taken to jail. And I looked around and I said, oh, that's what they mean. In here, it's just us. I find myself thinking about that story as I remember a very famous quote from Martin Luther King, who once said, "Those who seek to remain neutral in times of injustice have chosen the side of the oppressor." And I think the reason I'm thinking about that in relationship to the Black Panther Party and also our moment today is my sister, friend, Deetra Baker Wise, is a pastor in St. Louis, Missouri. And when Michael Brown was killed and protesters showed up in force at the police station there, a number of clergy worried about the safety of the protesters showed up to create a human shield, a line of pastors between the police and the protesters to protect the protesters. The protesters had been chanting "F the police" in their deep sense of rage at injustice, and when the pastors showed up, the chant changed to "F the clergy." I feel like in this moment, the people who were standing in the streets didn't experience the pastors as protecting them, but as having no idea what had brought them into the streets in the first place. And that sense of distance caused the protesters to feel like in these streets, it's just us. The police aren't here for us. The church isn't here for us. It's just us. I think in this moment, Jesus has something really important to teach us as our communities are pitted against each other. There's a story that you are very familiar with, where Jesus has been teaching all day to thousands of people, and the disciples come to him as the sun is beginning to set, and they say, "Jesus, the people are getting hungry. It has been a long day. Let them go home so they can eat." And what does Jesus say to them? You give them something to eat. Some of my Midwestern friends describe this as the miracle of the first church potluck. A little boy shows up and says, "You know what? I got 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish." And somebody else says, "Well, if he's willing to share, I might have a few almonds in my pocket." Somebody else says, "You know, I brought some olives to snack on. I was kind of hiding them, but I guess I can share them too." And eventually, 5,000 people are fed from the abundance of people's generosity, which they had been holding on to out of a sense of scarcity. But whether it is the miracle of the first church potluck or it is a miracle of loaves and fishes coming down from heaven out of nowhere, there's a part of the story I had not realized until my friend Rita Nakashima Brock, who's a disciples theologian, taught it to me. You see, the people who were gathered that day were living under the Roman Empire. They were getting taxed very heavily. They were living in a lot of fear. Their religious expression was limited because their religion was a threat to Rome and the emperor there. But they got a couple of things from that empire. They got protection by the Roman legion against foreign invaders. They got aqueducts. And they got bread. Not enough to thrive and grow and become a powerful people, but just enough to survive on, just enough to remember who was taking care of them, just enough to remind them who was in charge of their bodies and their survival. So when the disciples are talking to Jesus, they're actually saying, "Send them home, because the Roman bread is waiting there for them." And what Jesus says is, instead of the bread that keeps us enslaved, we as a community should feed each other. We don't need the bread of the empire. We can provide for each other. I think the hardest thing about Jesus' teachings for us today is going to be making sure we support each other so that in these hard times, it never feels like it's just us. Now, one of the things I am the most proud of in my work in Oakland right now is I'm involved with an organization called ASATA, the Alliance of South Asians Taking Action. And every year we offer a youth camp, a week-long camp, $50 with the possibility of a full scholarship, so that young people ages 18 to 23 can be trained in political activism, can learn how to do messaging and communications and protests and survival techniques, which have been very important to our community in the decade and a half since 9/11, as hate crimes against Muslim people and people who look Muslim have continued to rise by the year, and in 2015 increased by 63%. We don't have the statistics on 2016 yet, but we can only imagine from anecdotal evidence that they have gone up even more since then. And it's been important for us to learn how to help our community express our right to survival. But the other reason I think is even more important for us to get together is the thing I want to confess to you today. We have been spending much of our time on Black-Brown solidarity because my South Asian community has been trained up in a culture of anti-Blackness. We have been trained that our survival hinges on our proximity to whiteness and our distancing ourselves as much as possible from Black people, the Black community. We have been trained to believe that our survival is more important. And we have not, as a community, stood up when we have heard many of you say Black Lives Matter and have heard other people say all lives matter. We have not stood up to say what we know to be true, which is that all lives will matter when Black lives matter. And so we have work to do so that you don't feel about us that in the moments of your survival efforts, that it is just you fighting. And I come to you also knowing that in the coming days there will be an executive order that bans refugees fleeing from brutal dictatorships and violence, knowing that those executive orders will particularly harm Muslim people and people from Africa and the Middle East, and knowing that the hate crimes will also be targeted at South Asians and Arab Americans, and that we are terrified that as we stand up for our community's safety, that we will also feel like it is just us. The thing that gives me hope right now, or spurs me on, is my sister, Lenice Pinkard, a United Church of Christ pastor from this community of Oakland, also gave me a word the other day. What she said was, we need to remember love is not a feeling. Love is a discipline. Hope, likewise, is not a feeling, it is a discipline, and the same is true for peace. It's not a feeling, it's a discipline. It is repeated actions over and over to make something true. And I believe in the coming days, we in the Black and South Asian communities together will need to practice the discipline, because the feelings of love and hope and peace will be challenged and shredded. And we will need to hold on to those disciplines so that we can protect and support each other and not seek neutrality in moments of injustice. I believe we will need to be boldly and radically inclusive. And in order to do that, I'm turning in these days to my mentor, the Reverend Phil Lawson's favorite poem that I hope will ground all of us in the work ahead. When I say it's Phil's favorite poem, I mean it is the poem that got him through the days of lynching as a black man born in the 1940s. It is the poem that got him through the abuse he faced during the Greensboro lunch counter sit-ins and other aspects of his work in the civil rights movement. It's the poem that got him through being kicked out of the United Methodist Church twice for standing up for civil rights, for peace, for LGBT rights. It is the poem that I hope grounds us in the days to come as a discipline of love. He drew a circle that shut me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that drew him in. Amen.